Awesome. All right. I'm honestly so grateful to be here with you guys today. And let's pick it up where we left off last week, because that's the logical thing to do. It'd be weird if I'm like, let's go to a random part of the book. So where we're on is on page 85. And what we're going to be diving in today is to step 11. And at least for me, this is exciting. This is where so much growth has been for me. So where we're going to pick up is, it's not the very, very bottom paragraph. Thank you, Kicken. It's not the very bottom paragraph. It's one paragraph up where it says much has already been said. So that's where we're going to, oh, it may be a Zoom update. Yeah. If there's, oh, camera at work. Yeah, sorry. See, that's the thing. I will get distracted by the chat. Yeah, if you're having camera problems, try logging out, logging back in. Also, I'm just glad you're here, camera or not. So everyone that's here, I'm glad you're here. All right. So bottom of page 85. And this for me is where step 11 really begins, even though step 11 is italicized a paragraph later. It says much has already been said about receiving strength, inspiration, and direction from him who has all knowledge and power. And it's like, hey, wait a minute, where did it say that we were going to receive the strength, inspiration, direction from him who has all knowledge and power? Well, that's what the directions of these 12 steps taken out of this book are meant to do. And a really, really cool tie-in is if we go over to page 48, we don't like have to go there, but on page 48 in step 2, we're talking about that electricity, right? Where it's like, hey, we have numerous theories about electricity and we all believe them. And it says, why this ready acceptance? Simply because it is impossible to explain what we see, feel, direct, and use without a reasonable assumption as a starting point. So what we're doing in step 2 is we're starting with the assumption that there is a power greater than ourselves. Now, as a result of making that third step decision and diving into this course of action, I begin to be able to see, feel, and direct and use that power, right? We're receiving that strength. We're receiving that inspiration. We're receiving that direction from him who has all knowledge and power. And I love this where it says, if we have carefully followed directions, we have begun to sense the flow of his spirit into us. And I can ask myself this, have I at this point begun to feel that sense of God's presence? Have I begun to feel that flow? And it's one of those things where in step 1, I can ask, hey, is this my experience? Hey, is this my experience? And I can ask myself this here on page 85. Is this my experience? And if it's not, that's okay. What we're not doing is shaming anyone or throwing out anyone under the bus. It just tells us we might have some directions that we didn't follow. We might have some actions that we didn't take. And usually if I look at my gut, I know which ones they are. They're the ones I don't want to do it. Oh, it's usually that. And I just love that idea of flow, God flowing through me. In the 12 and 12, we use that prayer, that St. Francis prayer, which talks about being a channel of God's love, a channel of really these characteristics that I could not be in and of myself. And the 12 steps, at least for me, have been about clearing away the stuff in and of me that's blocking me from being that channel, from accessing that channel. And what we're going to see next week, from channeling that to others. So it says, to some extent, we have become God conscious. We're back on 85. If I did that thing where I bounce around, but I forgot to tell us to bounce back, we're back on 85. I've been known to do that. So when it says God conscious, and I love this little tie-in with step 2. Because with step 2, we spoke about how the chapter We Agnostics and the origin of the word agnostic. So is Greek in origin. It means without. And gnosis means knowledge. But it's not the good old newcomer, and you don't even need to be a newcomer to have this. I know. It's not the head I know. It is that heart level knowing. And the word conscious It's Latin in origin. And so welcome for those who just joined this study for the first time. Who would have expected an etymology lesson right off the bat? I'm so sorry. But conscious, it's Latin in origin. And the word con in Latin means with. And the chas or sire means knowing. And so in step 2, I'm coming from this place of without knowing to step 11, where it's we have become God conscious. We have become to have this knowing, this sense of a power greater than ourselves. And it says, we have begun to develop this vital sixth sense. And it's starting to develop and to grow. But we must go further, and that means more action. Man, it's almost as though this chapter is called into action, and it's really action heavy. At no point is it the rest on the laurels chapter, which I was kind of hoping, take a nap, doesn't have that direction. So I've begun to develop this consciousness, but I must go further, and that means more action. And so it says step 11 suggests prayer and meditation. Now, I want you to know, I read this as or for many years. For many years, I'm like, that's an or sort of proposition. I mean, you don't really expect me to have a daily meditative practice, do you? Yes, it is an and thing, and it needed to be an and thing for me, and I didn't realize it. And I just want to share just really quickly what my experience has been, because I did need to develop that daily prayer and meditation life. And I had to, and we're gonna turn the page and get right into the evening review. I needed to have a daily evening review practice as well. But I don't know about you guys, when I'm not taking daily action, that idea of daily action is overwhelming, right? I'm like, you want me to do what? All day, every day? And if I told you what my morning routine looked like, if I told myself what my morning routine looked like when I wasn't doing it, it'd be like, oh, who's got time for all that, right? So I could not start big. But what I did was I started small. I started with a few little prayers, and I started with a minute. Well, for me, it was 3 minutes, 3 minutes of meditation. And I built daily. And I'm a big believer in momentum. And I do that with my sponsees. I say, let's start from the very beginning, because that's what we're after in this thing. I'm after a spiritual awakening. So let's start from the beginning to have that relationship, beginning to cultivate those actions. Let's start. And it's always easier to do something that I'm already doing than it is to try to start it anew. If I start small, I can build momentum with it. If I start small, I can do it daily, and that builds that momentum, and it carries to today, where my evening and morning routines are huge, not huge in the lengths of time, although they do take time, but they are vital parts of my day that I could not go without because of what they do for me. And actually, that's the thing. I used alcohol, I used drugs, I used a whole bunch of things because of their effect. That's what I was after. I was after the effect. I want you to know, I pray and meditate for the same reason. I'm after the effect. And man, that effect, the effect comes, at least for me, with consistency. I couldn't do it once a week. Couldn't do it once in a while. I had to do it daily. And when I did it daily, man, it all just opened up, and my life changed in ways I never could have imagined. But I had to do both, and meditation, not or. Darn it. All right. Step 11, bottom page 85, suggests prayer and meditation. We shouldn't be shy on this matter of prayer. Better men than we are using it constantly. So that word constantly tells me that there is meant to be some consistency with it. And like we were talking about last week, it's not just meant to be something I do here and there once in a while, but it's meant to go with me as I go throughout my day. But for somebody like me, I need to have those anchor points of morning and evening so that I'm able to have that conscious contact as I go throughout my day. It works. And I mean, that's not even a full sentence, but I'm willing to say that is a promise that it works, comma. And here, all those promises come with little fine prints, come with little asterisks. This is the fine print. If we have the proper attitude and work at it, really work at it, right? We are seeking to improve. And there's different levels of seeking that happen, right? For those of you that have small children, or for those of us who have been small children, we know that there is a level of seeking that happens when a child has lost a sock. That is not seeking, you know what I mean? And then many kids just had the Easter egg hunt over the weekend. That's a little bit more of a nuanced level of seeking. They'll get bored after a while though, right? I need to seek, to actively seek and to actively work at it on a daily basis. Again, for me. And I use, for those that know me, you're like, yes, girl, you do. I use a lot of metaphors just because it helps me to explain and helps me to understand these concepts that were so difficult for me to understand. And if you don't like this metaphor, don't use it. Feel free. Throw it out if it doesn't jive with you. It's just something that helped me. Now, I am not married, but some of you on the Zoom call are married or in a relationship. Now, is it possible that if you did not speak to your spouse, except maybe once a week, you might not feel a little connected to your spouse or partner? Now, is it possible that if all you did was speak to your spouse, speak to your partner, even if you were doing it daily, you still might not feel super connected with your spouse or partner? Now, let's say we spoke to our partner and we listened to our partner. It's important to do that daily, to have that connection. We still won't have that same level of connectivity if we do and experience things and each other together. And a lot of what I found is the spiritual journey, especially with prayer and meditation. When I'm first doing it, it's a little awkward. It's a little like dating. You know, that first date, it feels like, oh, this is awkward. It's uncomfortable. That's what it feels like praying, right? My first experience with praying, it's like I'm talking to a wall. My first experience with meditation, man, I was like, I don't know if I can do this thing, right? But with consistency, a relationship started to develop, an experience started to happen, right? And now, with time and with consistency, this is where I turn to for a source of strength, for a source of comfort. Like for those who have been married or in relationship for a long time, exciting news happens and that's the person you want to share it with. Or devastating news happens and that's the person you want to turn to console you. That's what my relationship with this power has been like for me. And so again, for those that are like, what was the Big Book study with Paige like? I don't know. She was talking about dating, spiritual Tinder or something. I wasn't listening. That's, well, whatever helps you visualize it, you know? So welcome those who just joined us. Yeah, that's sort of what we were talking about. So it works if we work at it and we have the proper attitude. So it says it would be easy to be vague about this matter, yet we believe that we can make some definite and valuable suggestions. So here are the suggestions. Now, this first direction that we're going to see in this next paragraph is for evening review. And some people call evening review step 10. And of course, I understand why, because you see step 10 on the wall or on the Zoom screen, it talks about, you know, inventory. And if you look at the 12 and 12, it talks about inventory there. Some people call it step 11 because it falls under the directions of step 11 in this book. I call it evening review because for me, it doesn't matter what I call it. Actually, sometimes my sponsees will tell you I call it evening review electric boogaloo, just to be difficult, because I truly believe sometimes I want to intellectualize these things, and sometimes I want to be like, hey, I'm calling it the right thing, and I know the right thing, but it's far more important that I do it. So I don't care what people call it. I care whether, I mean, I shouldn't say I care whether you do it, but I care in a loving way, whether it's done, because when I do this, man, there's so much freedom. And the one thing I want to point out is it does not say to put pen to paper on evening review. That being said, I put pen to paper on my evening review. And the reason I do, and I really, I'm just so excited for when we can get into some of the later chapters and have a cool new experience with those forgotten chapters, because those chapters are all about demonstrating, not dictating, right? And so when I first came to this point in the process of my recovery, there were people who demonstrated, who were on fire, whose lights were on, who were filled with the joy of this program. And I'm not saying universally, I'm saying in my little neck of the woods, in my little AA community, or, my little recovery community, it was the people who were putting pen to paper. And then there were people who were saying, oh, it doesn't say to do that. But they didn't. And I'm not, by the way, I want to be very, very clear. There are people whose lights are on, who are on fire for this thing, who only do this direction as a meditative practice, and they are not bad and they are not wrong. I'm just sharing with you what my experience has been. And it is the people who are on fire, who have that light on in their eyes, right? Who are beacons of hope. Man, I do what they did, right? I do what they did. Absolutely, kicking. And so, and also, again, I'm not as big in the 12 and 12 because this is where these directions have come from. And I've fallen in love with this book and the directions in it. And deeper than that, the experience that I've had in this book. And it does say when prayer, meditation, and inventory are logically interwoven, it creates an unshakable foundation. So these are the directions for evening review, and I'll share with you what I do. It says, when we retire at night, we constructively review our day. So first and foremost, I want to have a review of my day. I want to look at what I did upon the day so far. And this is where we can bring in meditation. We can do a meditative review of our day. Some of you guys might be able to tell with how distracted I get. I also have to write that down. Whoopsies. The evening review pen just flew. So this is my evening review notebook. And I write down the actions that I took that day after I have a meditative practice. Because I need to remember, because I'm not the most focused, mindful person, even with a dedicated, consistent prayer and meditation practice. So I look at what I did in that day. And then it says, were we? Oh, and actually, sorry, before we get into that, what I want to say is when it says when we retire at night, that does not need to be right before I go to bed. In fact, that's regularly not the best time for me to do it because I'm tired and my brain's not working and I want to cut corners. And that's just my experience. When I retire at night, now that word retire, it does mean go to sleep, but it also in my 1930s dictionary, it does have that like winding down. But I want to talk about in the original manuscript of this book. So before this book was published, there was a number of edits made. But when we retire at night, was a direction that was meant to be carried out in the morning. And so what I kind of offer is do it when you do it. You know what I mean? It says when we retire at night. So do it when you get home from work. Do it when you get home from the meeting. Do it before dinner. Do it after dinner. It can be a natural just when you wound down for the day. But also, if that does not work for whatever reason, do it when you can do it. I mean, if there's anything I could say, doing it has so much more value than not doing it. What matters is what I do, not necessarily doing it at the perfect, precise, right time. Do it when it works. But it says, were we resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid? And you'll notice if we pop back over to page 84, that's what we were looking at in our step 10 directions. Watching for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. And so I look, okay, was I resentful? Was I selfish? Was I dishonest? And was I afraid? And what I find is that, the step 10 is meant to catch these things in the moment. But it's okay if I miss them, and I'm not doing it on purpose. But that this evening review becomes a safety net. I don't want to leave it intentionally, like I'll deal with it in my evening review. I don't want to let it fester, but I want to deal with it as quickly as possible. But if I miss it, there it is, and I can catch it. And so what that looks like for me, if I have a resentment, what I do is I take it through the columns. If I, at the end of the day, have that resentment, for me, it hasn't been as much value in just saying, yeah, I was resentful, he was a jerk. Flip the page, you know what I mean? That hasn't been where the freedom was for me. I want to continue to get to where I was at fault and to see my patterns and my defects. Similarly, if I have a fear, I take it through those columns. Again, because if I have a fear, I don't want to be like, yep, I was full of fear today. That wasn't any fun. I want to begin to really see how that relying upon God can help me overcome that. And if I was selfish, I write where that selfishness was. Why? Because that helps me see those patterns of those defects that are cutting me off from God. And if I was dishonest, I write about that, and I typically will write why. Why am I dishonest? Well, usually a fear. Oh man, more columns to do, you know? Usually my experience and my and I'm just going to share my dishonesty today is rarely that sort of cash register stealing things from you. Quite often it's me overcommitting myself and saying yes to things that I'm not able to do. Or quite often it's, you know, that sort of stuff, that level of dishonesty, or not expressing my feelings, or not just communicating in a transparent way. That's where that tends to be. Why? Fear, right? And so I take it through those columns. The next question it asks, do we owe an apology? And I ask myself this. The resentments can help me illuminate where I owe an apology, but man, sometimes I just know. And the best thing I can do is make a little note about it. And I do that so it helps me be accountable, because it's easy for me to be like, whoop, out of sight, out of mind. Helps me be accountable with it. And it says, have we kept something to ourselves which should be discussed with another person at once? Or there's things, or there's secrets that are going on inside me that maybe I can feel, I know. Maybe it's that inventory that's building up, and I need to take that inventory to my sponsor or to a pillar. But is there something going on? And usually, yeah, is it a secret? And sometimes for me, it's genuinely things like, man, to reach out to that person, and I haven't, and I keep forgetting to. And I don't think that's the intention, but sometimes I'm not very focused, so I make a note of it there. And then it asks, were we kind and loving toward all? All. I don't know about you guys, it is the all that gets me. And I had a sponsor that was like, girl, you don't have to be that hard on yourself. But I look at the posture of my heart in that question, because rarely am I going to show up to life and be antagonistic. I'm pretty conflict averse. I am codependent. I want y'all to like me. So I'm not going to show up and be intentionally abrasive. But oftentimes in my heart, I can carry judgment and criticism. And I look at where was I kind and loving or not kind and loving in my heart? And I make a little note of that. And it says, what could we have done better? So that's the next question. What could I have done better? And that's not a punitive thing. That, and what is really cool about that question is that question allows me to guide the vision of my prayer life in the morning that next day. So I can take that question of what could I have done better and use it to guide my prayers. And often it's things like present, intentional, and maybe it is things like, man, I shouldn't have fallen into that judgment. Not that I can overcome judgment on my own, but turn to God's love to channel that love that I did not have. That's what it looks like for me in my evening review, you know? And it says, were we thinking of ourselves most of the time? Or were we thinking of what we could do for others, of what we can pack into the stream of life? And I like to look at my day. Was I thinking of others, or was I thinking of what I could do for others, you know? And that's where I can make a list. I find it helpful to list, and I typically do it at the start, but I have some sponsees who do it at the end. List those spiritual actions taken, list where they were of service, list where they were working with their sponsees, list those things. Because, yeah, we're not just all bad. We have ups and downs within a day. And so that's what that evening review process. And, you know, I don't know if it's helpful or not, but I'll just share this. I made a little, if it'll work, there it goes. I made a little diagram to send to some sponsees, just so that they could see, you know, how to take exactly those questions from the book and just write them out. And again, there are people who do it via meditation and in a very meditative way, and that is okay too. But yeah, I take those questions and you know, 1, reviewing my day. 2, looking at resentment. 3, looking at selfishness. 4, dishonesty. And 5, fears. The 6th one, looking at, do I have an apology? 7 is where have we kept something which I need to share with someone? 8, were we kind of loving? 9, what could I have done better? And 10, were we thinking of myself or was I thinking of others? And so that's kind of taking exactly what comes from 86 and just putting it on paper in a way that's kind of easy to see. And if that's helpful for anyone, I can always share it and throw it in the WhatsApp after. So, all right. And then it says, but we must be careful not to drift into worry, remorse, or morbid reflection. And so the purpose of the evening review is not to be punitive. It's not to punish myself. It's not to I'm trying to watch my language, not to kick myself in the butt in a meaningless way. The purpose of the evening review is to catch those things inside of me that are blocking me off from that power, which is God. That's simply what I'm trying to do. And it says, because for that would diminish our usefulness to others. And how beautiful how that tie-in that we have in the evening review process with our 3rd step decision, where I'm going out to work for God. What a beautiful tie into that 7th step prayer, where I'm asking for these things to be removed so I can go out and be of use to God and my fellows. And so that's what we're doing. I'm not here to, you know, beat myself up. I'm just trying to see what's cutting me off from God. And my experience is those things are happening whether I'm inventorying them or not. You know what I mean? It's building up whether I'm looking at them or not. So sometimes I have people that are like, man, evening review, it seems really negative. No. And you know, the more that I do this, the cleaner my house is, the less these things build up and the less there is to write on, you know, or the less there is to take through this process. And again, this process, I continue to, like, steps 10 and 11, we talk about them being maintenance steps. And yes, they are maintenance steps, but more than that, they are growth steps. Man, the more I continue to inventory myself, the more I see the truth about myself, the more I see the truth about the things in me that are blocking me off from God and from you. And the more I'm able to help you have this spiritual experience. Because although we're all different, there's a lot of similarities. So just my sponsor tells me all the time, find someone you can help every day. Not the guys you deal with at work. Make sure it's a stranger, even if it's just opening a door or picking up a piece of trash, just something. Absolutely. One of my favorite, and I was talking about this last week, one of my favorite ways to go and to be of service, like quick service, is, and turn my thoughts to someone I can help, is to reach out to somebody I wouldn't normally and let them know that I was thinking about them, let them know they're God's favorite. That's usually my favorite. Let them know the world is a better place because they're a part of it. Just this quick way to turn my thoughts to someone I can help, especially when I'm really, really busy. And kind of a cool tie-in with that and step 11 is it started because I was exploring various other spiritual practices. So I'll talk about that if I do good at managing my time here in a little bit. I haven't always been known to manage my time well. Oh, we alcoholics are undisciplined, so we let God discipline us in the simple way we've just outlined. Yes, it's a little foreshadowing into what we're going to wrap up with, but time management. All right. So it says, after making our review, we ask, And anytime in this book, it says we ask, this is a prayer. It says, we ask God's forgiveness and inquire what corrective measures should be taken. So I'm asking God's forgiveness. Now, I want you to know, I read that and I was like, hey, wait a minute. I didn't think that this was a punishing God or a punitive God that was like holding my defects or my shortcomings over my head. And my experience is that it's not. My experience is that I am punished by my defects, not for my defects. My experience is, and I really mean this, the God that I've found here is incredibly loving, unconditionally loving. So why am I asking forgiveness? And it sort of dawned on me in the step 9 process. Because I go out and I make my amends, and usually it's in my amends, not always, and we don't do it to be forgiven. But amends is not a process of, asking them to forgive me. That's not what it is. But usually in going out and making those amends, that's when I find that forgiveness. And I realized I was already forgiven, but I had to ask first. And I think that's what this prayer is all about. It's not about trying to get good to get God. It's trying to open somebody like me, who is so naturally filled with guilt and shame, to the unconditional nature of God's love. And then it says, when we inquire what corrective measures should be taken. So there's another opportunity to come to a meditative practice, to open ourselves up to expectancy and receptivity. And what we're going to talk about, the next paragraph is on awakening. So this really was meant to be when we get up in the morning. But a lot of what On Awakening is pointing to is the meditative practice that the Oxford group members had in the 1930s and before. And I just recently finished a book called When Man Listens by Cecil Rose. And it's not a long book, and I had my computer read it to me just in case you think I'm a smarty pants. I am not. But it talked about the practices of the Oxford movement. And a lot of what they did was a practice that in modern language would be called like two-way prayer, where they would do this read out of a sacred book. For them in the Oxford movement, it would be the Bible, but it could be any book that is inspiring. And they would sit in this place of expectancy and receptivity and expect to receive guidance. And they would have pen or pencil, doesn't matter if it's pencil, and write the thoughts that came to mind. And then what they would do is they would check those thoughts with the tenets of the Oxford group. So the Oxford group had these tenets called the 4 absolutes: absolute love, absolute unselfishness, absolute honesty, and absolute purity. And if their guidance fell kind of within those range, by the way, purity is purity of motive. So in case you guys are worried, it's like no dirty thoughts. No, it's not that. It's not really focusing on that. Purity of motive. And so they would test that guidance with those sort of ideals. And if it was in line with those ideals, then it was probably, divine guidance. And even if it wasn't, it's probably a better decision than one that was not in line with those ideals. And so that was a lot of the practice that was spoken about in the Oxford group. And that's kind of what, when we go through On Awakening, that's what On Awakening is kind of pointing to. It's not saying very specifically, because they didn't want to tie in Alcoholics Anonymous with the Oxford group, but that's kind of what it's pointing to. But one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to, as we go through, I'm going to point out where the prayers are, where the directions are, what that looked like. But we're also going to see that this was not the only form of meditation that was available at this time. So we're just going to go through rock and roll. So On Awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. So we're talking about this contemplative thinking. And this isn't just like thinking about my day. Okay, I'm going to do this, 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 this. We're going a little bit deeper in our thoughts. And this is something that can kind of be a little bit difficult to explain if we haven't had experience with it. It's a meditative process. And it says we consider our plans for the day. before we begin, it says we ask. What is that? That is a prayer. Anytime in this book, it says we ask. It's a prayer. So we ask God to direct our thinking, especially that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, or self-seeking motives. So that's a prayer. It's a prayer that we're going to use before we enter a period of meditation. It says, under these conditions, we can employ our mental faculties with assurance. For after all, God gave us brains to use. Our thought life will be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. So what it's talking about, and in that book by Cecil Rose, it really describes that there's these two thoughts. So there's this thought that's like me just thinking, and that's the thought like, oh, I'm bored. You know, that thought, oh, what do I have to do laundry? Oh, I forgot to call somebody. That thought. But there's a voice that's below that thought and deeper than that thought. And what we're doing is we're listening for that voice beneath it. And so it says, in thinking about our day, we may face indecision. We may not be able to determine which course to take. Here, we ask God. So again, there's another prayer. And believe me, often indecision, and not just, oh, I got just one sec. I got a message. The opposites of the absolutes are in the 11th, 10th, and yeah, absolutely. The opposites of absolutes would tie into resentment, selfishness, dishonesty, and fear. Absolutely. I love that little tie-in. I'm so here for that stuff. And like I said, easily distracted. So please continue to put things into the chat, and then it's just fun for all of us. All right. So here we ask for inspiration and intuitive thought or decision. We relax and take it easy. We don't struggle. And what we're pointing to is that period of, or that place of expectancy and receptivity, that openness. And it says we are surprised how the right answers come after we have tried this for a while. What used to be the hunch or the occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of the mind. And that is powerful. Because what happens is my thought life is the result of taking these actions, continuing in daily prayer, meditation, following these directions. My thoughts change. And just like every other promise in the book, I don't do it. It happens to me. And what I mean by that is I remember how I would regularly wake up in the mornings or early afternoon, don't judge me, but how I would wake up is I effing hate myself. Oh, I can't believe I'm alive. I effing hate myself. I effing hate myself. That's how I would wake up pretty well every single morning. And I wasn't even awake to that. I needed to have a daily meditative practice to begin to even see that that's what my thought life was doing. I didn't even know I had a thought life. It's just, my thoughts were my reality. I thought, yes, I am a piece of garbage, obviously. Not that I was thinking that I was a piece of garbage, right? And so I remember, as a result of consistent daily prayer, daily meditation, daily evening review, daily evening prayer, like doing this stuff daily and consistently, I remember the first time I woke up and I was already praying. And I noticed, because that had never happened to me before. My thought life changed. It was probably about a year and a half ago. I was on the phone with a friend of mine, and this friend knew me in my early recovery. Like, she knew me around year 2 or 3 onward sober. And she said, Paige, you were the most negative, self-deprecating person that I had ever met. Me. And she's not lying. I was. She's right. Like, I was. Also, there is something about my ego that's like, I was winning. I won most, right? But that's who I was. And what changed in my life? Well, I changed, and the actions I took changed. And that was the order. That wasn't the order. I had to take the action. That daily prayer, daily meditation, daily evening review, it utterly transformed who I am on a fundamental level. And like, it was always who I wanted to be, but I couldn't live up to that ideal. And it's not, and by the way, it's not like Paige is perfect over here. I'm not saying I'm the ideal Paige, no, but like, man, I did not think that thought of suicide could ever leave. That little voice in the back of my head that I remember having as early as kindergarten. Yeah, for ages 4 or 5, for those in different parts of the world, that I had at the age of 4, that said, if it gets bad enough, you don't need to be here anymore, Paige, you can just check out. I did not think that could ever go. And I can't speak to anyone else's experience with that sort of stuff, but I can share mine. And it was only, and I really mean only, this daily prayer, daily meditation, daily evening review that allowed me to change. And of course I had to do the other steps, getting here. Obviously, we're not throwing those out. I'm not saying do only this, all of it. We do all of this, but I changed, and it happened to me. And it wasn't even that was the aim. I didn't have like non-suicidal ideation as a goal. I didn't even think it was possible. So I wasn't aiming towards that, but God took me there, right? And so it says, back to the reading, being still inexperienced and just having made conscious contact with God, it is not probable that we are going to be inspired at all times. We may pay for this presumption in all sorts of absurd actions and ideas. Nevertheless, we will find that our thinking will, as time passes, be more and more on the plane of inspiration. We have come to rely upon it. And a fun little tie-in, I love taking people through the traditions and going through the traditions with them. A fun little tie-in to that, like absurd actions and ideas is in the 12 and 12 on tradition 2, Bill Wilson has this idea that like, hey, well, he was offered a job at the town's hospital. Hey, I should get paid to do this sort of work. And he had this what felt like divine inspiration. And then he goes to his home group and he tells them this idea, and the voice of God spoke loud and clear through the God conscious, absolutely not, Bill, right? And so that's why, solitary self-appraisal is insufficient when it comes to the 5th step, and solitary self-appraisal continues to remain insufficient. And so it says, we usually conclude the period of meditation with a prayer. So this is a prayer, and it tells us that this is a meditative period that we were in. So a prayer this is a prayer, that we be shown all throughout the day what our next step is to be, that we be given whatever we need to take care of such problems. We ask especially for freedom from self-will, and are careful to make no requests for ourselves only. We may ask for ourselves, however, if others will be helped. We are careful never to pray for our own selfish ends. Many of us have wasted a lot of time doing that, and it doesn't work. You can easily see why. And so what we're not doing is the get me a fancy car, I call them the get me a pony prayers. What about get me this, get me that, give me this. But I feel like there's value in God, help me to be kind and honest and loving, because I'm helping others with this. And a lot of times when I pray for others, I try to say, God, I don't know what your will is for them, but I pray that you be with them and give them what they need. And sometimes I'll be honest, I'll pray, God, I pray that you would help them to find their way to recovery, if that be your will. And I'll throw in, if that be your will. And often for me, it's just, God, be with them. Yes, it is. Yeah, I just saw the word rubbing and I wanted to be careful before I started reading it out. So it's not about like rubbing a genie's lamp in 3 wishes. It's not get me a pony, get me out of this one, get me. It's really God work through me. God transform me so I can help others. God be with that person who is in pain. That's what it's been about, at least for me. And that's what my experience is. And I would strongly encourage you to have your own. Yes, because this whole thing is experiential. Doesn't matter if I can tell you what book points to this, or what page this is on, or in tradition 2, what page is that on? 136 and 138. That doesn't matter. It is what I do that allows me to experience this power. That's what matters. And it says, if circumstances warrant, we ask our wives or friends to join us in morning meditation. And one of my favorite things is to pray and to meditate with others. I do that with sponsees. We always start with a prayer. And sometimes if they're struggling with meditation, I'm like, well, let's just do a meditation together. Let's just do that together. And it's a beautiful, wonderful thing to share these spiritual actions with others, where it can be both so intimate and so personal. And there's beauty in it being a communal activity as well. And it says, if we belong to a religious denomination which requires a definite morning devotion, we attend to that also. If not members of religious bodies, we sometimes select and memorize a few set prayers which emphasize the principles which we have been discussing. There are many helpful books also. Suggestions about these may be obtained from one's priest, minister, or rabbi. Be quick to see where religious people are right. Make use of what they offer. Now that paragraph, that has just blown wide open my step 11 practice. And that is where so much fun can be had. And you might be like, fun? I know I'm a bit of a nerd, and I'm going to reference some things. But when it talks about memorizing a few set prayers, I've done a big book study for a number of years, and there was a gal, and she came and she had this notebook where she took prayers from the big book and took prayers from other places, and she put them in a notebook. And I'm like, that's a great idea. So I did it. You might notice my prayer book, it cost $1.50, and it's got superheroes on it because I'm an adult. But in it, I've got a number of the prayers. I'm not going to say all of them, but I have a bunch of prayers from the big book. I have a bunch of prayers from all various faith traditions. One of my favorite things to do is connect with people outside of 12-step, because if you ask a 12-step person, yeah, Kickin's got it. If you ask a 12-step person what their favorite prayer is, you're going to get kind of some of the same answers. So I asked some friends of mine who weren't in 12-step, who had various faith traditions, what their favorite prayers were. And man, so I got prayers in this book that I wrote. I just wrote out a variety of prayers. And it began to guide my prayer life in the morning and every night. And it's just been this incredible, wonderful experience. And I say these prayers every day and every night. And I do have prayers that come from the heart. It's not just that sort of structured prayer, but it was a place to start. And it sort of opened it up for me. And then when it talks about be quick to see where religious people are right, make use of what they have to offer, man, that has been the coolest thing. See, I love people who are in the mystical tradition. And you don't have to be. You don't have to like what I like. This is where I seek and I explore and I do all these different things. And you don't have to do what I do. But I love the mystical just means people who've had experiences. And I'm after experience. This whole thing is about experience. So I seek from various people of various traditions. I joke with my sponsees about how they joke with me about how, girl, why you like so many old dead nuns, these medieval old dead nuns, just random stuff, and then other random stuff. And I would seek and I would try different ways to seek and connect, just kind of like if you were to only go on a date with your partner to the same place at the same time every week, it might get a little stale. So it's kind of nice to have different experiences, right? But also one of the things that I heard, people would say, well, meditation didn't exist back in the 1930s or the 1920s when the Oxford group, and I will say that the Oxford group was utilizing something known as two-way prayer. But because I'm a fun, exciting human being who's super, super fun at parties, I was having a listen to William James' Varieties of Religious Experiences, because, fun times. And in that book, it connected a number of dots for me. In that book, it talks about various faith traditions in the Western culture. So not even just, it does make reference to Sufi mysticism in Varieties of Religious Experiences. But if this book gets published, as it would have done 84 years ago today, is it 84, 86? Yes. Yeah. Thank you. 84 years ago today, there were in the Western tradition various meditative techniques that existed. There was a prayer of recollection, which was a meditative practice. There was a prayer of quiet, again, a meditative practice. There was a quietism movement. So there was the spiritual exercises of Saint Ignatia. I mean, the evening review and morning practices, they follow a lot of the examine practice that was in that tradition. There were things like Lectio Divina, these things that exist, and only a little bit of exploring outside of the bounds of the Oxford group or this book, and you would have stumbled across it. And the reason I share that is because if you have done a guided there was a spiritual guy I listened to. He wrote a book in the 1700s. It was a French book in the I obviously listened to it in English, but it was a French book in the 1700s. And it essentially was a series of guided meditations. So even those existed in that time. So if you're feeling this call to seek, to deepen, to explore, it's okay. I want to encourage you. You know, the realm of the spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding. If it's that in 2, why would it be in 11? Now, of course, I need to be grounded in this. I don't want to fly out the door on a thing of religious or spiritual zeal, but I want to seek, and I want to deepen, and I want to explore. And of course, I want to be grounded in this. And so, now I'm mindful of the time. We might go a minute or 2 over, and that's absolutely my bad, you guys. So we were giving directions for what we do as we retire at night, which again can be done at any time upon awakening. So what we do in the morning. And now these are the directions for what we do as we go throughout the day. It says, as we go throughout the day, we pause when agitated or doubtful. And again, how do I develop a pause? I got to do prayer. I got to do meditation. I got to have those anchor prayer and meditations to even begin to have a pause as I go throughout the day. Because I'm not going to notice I'm agitated or doubtful, right? So we pause when agitated or doubtful and ask. There's another prayer. Ask for the right thought or action. It says we constantly remind ourselves that we are no longer running the show. When was I no longer running the show? Step 3, I was fired. So again, I can work that as a prayer. I can work that as a mantra. I can use that as I go throughout my day. And it says humbly saying to ourselves many times each day, also this, thy will be done. And how beautifully that ties in with our 10th step prayer of how can I best serve thee? Thy will, not mine, be done. It's a beautiful, beautiful pocket prayer. Thy will be done. I'm not going to forget it. Thy will be done. I can use it wherever I go. It says we are then in much less danger of excitement. Didn't know I'd get in danger with excitement, but here we are, right? It is warning, right? Excitement, fear, anger, worry, self-pity, or foolish decision. We become much more efficient. We do not tire so easily, for we are not burning up energy foolishly as we did when we were trying to arrange life to suit ourselves. See, in the 3rd step, when we're talking about the actor playing the director, it takes a lot of energy to try to control and manipulate and get people to stand in the place they need to stand and do the things they need to do. It's exhausting. And it's one of those things. Now, I do have chronic health issues, so I do have fatigue more often than most. But if I am tired and there is no good reason for me to be tired, it can be a little bit of a signal that I've been living in self-will. And I'm trying to control that which is none of my business, that which is not my job. I've been sitting myself in the delusion of the God chair, pushing buttons on a controller that's not even plugged in, right? So we're letting God be in charge. And I promise this is a more efficient way. There's a saying, and I don't know whether it comes from the Dalai Lama or who it comes from exactly, but it's like that saying is everyone should meditate for 20 minutes a day. unless you're really, really busy. If you're really, really busy, then you should meditate for an hour a day. And Zen proverb. Yeah. I didn't know its origins, but yeah, truly, that's been the more that I dedicate to connecting with God, the easier it just flows. Man, and step 11 for me, it's been all about that flow. So instead of wrestling happiness and satisfaction like I was in step 3, I'm resting in that flow of God's love in step 11 and knowing this power. It works. It really does. Again, that promise. It works. It works. It really does. We alcoholics are undisciplined, rude, like us, we're rude, pulling us out. So we let God discipline us in the simple way we have just outlined. Daily disciplines. So that's what I call them. And I shouldn't, because discipline doesn't sound fun. But these daily actions, right? Man, it does. It so works. It says, but that is not all. It's action, more action. See this whole chapter. Faith without works was dead. What a beautiful tie-in throughout this whole book. Faith, belief in God without action. I'm gonna get loaded. I'm gonna get drunk. So it says the next chapter is entirely devoted to step 12. And how wonderful, because the most sure sign that we have had a spiritual experience, that we've been connected with a power greater than ourselves, is the desire to help somebody else. So we'll learn how to do that next week. Awesome.